Hello all and welcome. My name is Margaret O'Neill. I'm a historical costumer and textile conservator in training. You may not have seen me on this channel for the last few months because I've actually been doing my second year of grad school for textile conservation. I've been working on a 1940s designer piece and she's a hot mess, and I've been in the lab almost every single day for the past 2 months, but I hope to get back to this channel. But I wanted to pop on here because something has happened in the historical dress world that is explosive and controversial, and it's kind of the most public I think I've seen conservation, or at least textile, especially costume conservation, get in a while. And that is, of course, Kim Kardashian wearing Marilyn Monroe's original Happy Birthday, Mr. President dress to the Met Gala. A little bit of background. The Met Gala happens every year, first Monday in May, normally, and it corresponds to the Met Costume Institute's annual exhibition. Now, it should be noted, the Met Costume Institute is the only department of the Met that does not receive funding from any outside sources. They need to do all of their funding themselves, and that's what the Met Gala actually is funding the wonderful work that the conservators, curators, and staff do over at the Met Costume Institute. Now, we can talk about the Met Gala in a different video and all about the pros and cons of it and the different aspects that go into it. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about Kim Kardashian wearing Marilyn Monroe's original dress and the ethical concerns and preservation concerns surrounding that. This is actually a topic I wanted to talk about for a while, and that is wearing antique and original and even some vintage garments as well, because it's an ethical gray area, and sometimes I feel I feel some type of way about it. You know, I don't have a script for this video. I've been trying to write a script for a video like this for a long time. But again, I've been doing school. But I really wanted to talk about this while this is still in the public zeitgeist. Kim Kardashian wore this gown to the Met Gala. It was the original gown that Marilyn Monroe sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President in the early 1960s. The dress was created for Marilyn Monroe, and it was the first, quote, like, nearly nude dress. It's made out of a souffle gauze, which is this very beautiful stretchy fabric, and encrusted with embellishments. It is the most expensive dress ever sold at auction, clocking in just under $5 million. It was actually bought by Ripley's Believe It or Not Orlando, which we will talk about in a second. Kim wore this to the Met Gala for the theme Gilded Glamour. This has nothing to do with gilded glamour. Let's be real, not much of those dresses or ensembles had much to do with gilded glamour, which was about the Gilded Age in America from 1870 to 1900. And Kim has caused quite a stir in the textile conservation community because this is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing, but we'll get into why it's such a big deal. I'm just gonna get my personal opinion out of the way. I don't think Kim should have worn this dress, personally, but I don't think as heated as some other people about it. Here are the facts with Kim and the dress. She wore the gown on the red carpet, up to the top of the stairs, and then changed into Reproduction gown. Evidently, she was trying to be as respectful to the dress as possible. She wasn't wearing her usual body makeup. She wasn't wearing her usual lotions and things, as she states. She apparently shed 16 pounds to get into the dress, which is kind of problematic in its own right, to be honest with you. The dress may not have zipped all the way because she was wearing the fur, which we didn't see the back of the zipper. And evidently there was a conservation staff member who was looking over the dress as well. With all that being said, though, the dress is still going to take damage. I say this to a lot of people. The fastest way to ruin an antique piece is to wear it, long or short of the matter. So the dress going down the red carpet at the Met Gala will cause damage to it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That dress will have taken damage. So this dress is, I believe, of historic significance. I think it's in the public interest for this dress to be preserved long term. To be honest, it probably should be in the Smithsonian or some other type of museum like that, but it's at Ripley's Believe It or Not. I'm not entirely sure what the collections policy at Ripley's Believe It or Not is. It's probably not what we in the museum field call an accessioned object, which is a piece that's been taken into a museum for long-term preservation, for essentially historic preservation for you and me and researchers and whoever else to look at in the future.
I will say there are some exceptions to wearing accessioned costume pieces, and one of those is in ceremonial rituals for Native and Indigenous peoples. An example of this would be jingle dresses of the Ojibwe and Greater Anishinaabe tribes, and sometimes these are worn for dancing ceremonies. So that is seen as respectful to the object and is a notable exception to the ethics of wearing museum garments.
So I don't necessarily think that Kim wearing the dress stepped on any of Ripley's Believe It or Not policies, but there's a really long and sordid history with people wearing antique garments in the museum field and in just our society in general. You have to know that as a textile conservator, every single day I see dresses that were altered in the mid-20th century for fancy dress, and they were beautiful 1860s garments, and they are ruined. I have one in my collection. I will link that video down below. I have seen beautiful early 20th century dresses be completely destroyed by someone having worn them to a party. I have seen museum textiles that are irrevocably altered because they were worn in dress shows in the mid-century, and they are stained and pit stained to the nth degree where they are no longer exhibitable. I have seen 18th century dresses cut up and made into furniture upholstery, and that's something that happened quite often in the early 20th century. I have seen 18th century dresses altered for the late 19th century for costume parties, and the list goes on and on and on. And in the 1980s, conservators of costume and textiles came together and they said wearing historic pieces is unethical because it will ruin the object. I don't care if it fit Kim perfectly and she didn't step on the hem and nothing happened to it. The gravity of it, the heat from her body, the sweat, the perspiration is going to damage it.
I should also note here that this dress was meant to be worn without undergarments. It was actually structured for Marilyn Monroe so she could wear it essentially nude. That was the entire idea of the dress. So there is very little barrier between Kim and the dress, which creates all sorts of issues. The oils are going to get onto that dress no matter what. It also doesn't fit her because it was made for Marilyn Monroe, which is another issue because that's putting stress on the seams and the embellishments and all that. So just wanted to add that as well, that this dress isn't a 19th century piece where you can add layers of chemises and corset covers to protect from the body. This dress is supposed to be right next to the body.
I have just spent 3 months attempting to get sweat stains out of a 1940s gown. They are not coming out. They embrittle the fabric, so it literally eats away at the fabric. Sweat is acidic. It's lactic acid. It's mostly water, but it's lactic acid and bacteria and some trace minerals. That will literally eat away at the fabric, especially silk. I don't know if this dress was silk or not. It's going to damage the dress. But there's a flip side to this, and I think that it's important to know that us as textile conservators and costume conservators are going to have this gut reaction of, oh my God, she's ruining that dress, because we've seen that over and over and over again, and we're sick and we're tired of these objects not being respected. We're done with these objects not being respected. And it's really only been within the last, 20, 10, 15, 5 years, like very recently, that people are starting to pay attention to these objects, people are starting to exhibit these objects more, and people are actually starting to appreciate these objects. The field is still super young, and that's where we're coming from, is this place of defensiveness because people haven't taken us seriously or wanted to think of our pieces as important. But costume is kinetic. It loses something when it's just sitting there on a mannequin. It loses something when it's sitting in storage. It loses that intangible quality about it, about its movement. I can see an argument to say, Kim did add value to this dress because she brought a new story to it. This entire incident of Kim wearing this dress to the Met Gala is a part of this dress's history now, and honestly brings it to the public forefront and allows us to appreciate it in a new way. Does that cancel out the damage that's done to the physical object? I would argue probably not, but you could make that argument. In the end, I think that the person who's winning is Kim here, because she and Ripley's Believe It or Not set out to create a viral moment. And guess what? They did. For the wrong reasons or the right reasons, I don't necessarily think the Kardashians are super concerned with the ethics of their publicity. I think they're more concerned with publicity in general. Then again, I'm not really here to comment on whether Kim was worthy or not to wear the dress. I think that, frankly, the only person who is worthy to wear that dress is Marilyn herself, which she already did. So iconic and historic because she wore it in that moment. I will say, if Marilyn was alive and we could ask her, I would be really interested to see what she would say about this entire situation. Because if she's all for it, then I'm all for it. But unfortunately, we can't ask her that question, and I don't think it's really worth speculating on the fact because we'll never truly know if she would have approved or not. But if she did approve, I would be like, okay, Marilyn said it's cool, like, whatever. Granted, there is another aspect to this that I think it's really important to talk about, and that is sort of the rise in people wearing historic dress. Obviously, we talked about previous that throughout the early and mid 20th centuries that people rampantly wore historic dress and altered it rampantly. And that is what we're kind of pushing back on, and we're still feeling the effects of that. But I've seen very recently people are wearing quote unquote archive pieces. Bella Hadid, within the last month, week, 2 weeks, wore a vintage Dior by Yves Saint Laurent dress. And Zendaya was pictured in a vintage Balmain dress.
Popping in here, I do think these two instances of Bella and Zendaya wearing these vintage gowns is slightly different from Kim because they are not of as great historical significance. Granted, they're still old pieces. Zendaya's is from the Balmain archive, which I don't know what their collections policy is either. There still could be some major condition issues with these, but there might also be not. So these two instances are on the line for me and really sort of illustrate what I'm going to talk about next, which is I love wearing vintage clothes. I love seeing them on the runway. I love those moments, but there is a point at which it becomes an issue, but there's also a point at which it's not an issue. So that's something that I'm just going to struggle with for the rest of my life.
I think there is a fear among textile conservators, and not an unfounded fear, that people, rich, famous, wealthy, powerful people, are going to start asking museum collections to loan out these pieces. And I know that museum conservators and curators are asked those questions, and they have to say no, because we can't allow just a few people to have access to these objects. These objects should belong to the wider public and should be able to be there for researchers and viewers alike. I think that these pieces, especially if they're in museum collections and are accessioned, or even if they're just historic pieces like the Marilyn dress, should be preserved for the general public and should not just be the playthings of the wealthy to create viral moments. I think that that is not respecting them in a way. Granted, I think that this doesn't necessarily translate to everybody who wears antique garments. There is a fine line between saving what's important and sort of saving everything. We can't save everything. It's so difficult for me with the wearing historic dress thing because I think that sometimes it's fine. Like, I love wearing vintage clothes. I have so many vintage clothes that I love wearing. Clothes I wear 40s dresses to work. Like, I love doing that. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but there are points where I say to a dress, like, you know what, I can't wear this anymore. And I have a hard time with like people wearing historic dress just in general, partially because I want to save every piece of historic dress, but I know that not every piece of antique clothing can be saved. And I think there is some value in sort of having wiggle room in that area. Granted, if it's an accessioned museum object or has like important historical value like the Marilyn dress does, I think unethical, bad, don't do that. But just like in general, I think there's some wiggle room with wearing historic dress if you are respectful, if you know what you're doing and you know that wearing that piece is going to cause it damage. Granted, I will say, don't wear 20s and 30s dresses to parties if you think that they're fragile, because guess what? It's going to leave the party before you do.
What I'm trying to say, and rambling on and on about here, is that not all antique and vintage garments are necessarily historic or need to be saved long term. They don't necessarily have the type of value, whether that be monetary or historical, where they need to be preserved long term for material preservation in a museum setting. And it is totally fine to wear those objects. If you do enjoy that, you just need to be aware of the consequences. I will also say, and this is a note and just something that bugs me, wearing vintage and antique garments, I don't think necessarily falls into the sustainable camp of clothing. And this is something I should probably go on in a different video. But yeah, you can't remake this type of thing. And you just need to be aware that it is an unrenewable resource. So, just there's that too.
And I don't know. I have so many thoughts on this, and I've like spent so long trying to think about all of them and like put them in a concise script, and I just haven't been able to, so we're just spitting them out here. The one thing I also have to say about Kim's dress and this moment is the difference between the original and the reproduction. So obviously the original is the historic piece that Marilyn wore, but she wore a reproduction for most of the evening. So the question stands, why didn't she just wear the reproduction? I think the answer to that question is because she wanted to create the viral moment. But does her wearing the original dress add anything necessarily other than it being the original and her wanting to make this Marilyn connection? I don't know. It's like, we already do have footage of Marilyn wearing this dress, and I think if Kim wore the reproduction, it would have not been as impactful, but it would have been more respectful to the original gown. Granted, I think honestly, and this is probably petty, but I think honestly my biggest gripe with this entire situation is that it's not on theme. If Kim showed up in a Worth gown or a Worth tea gown or something, and she was like, oh, I wore the original down the red carpet and then changed into, a reproduction for dinner, I'd be like, okay, yeah, we're on theme, but we're not. I think it's important to note that this situation is very different because it's such a historic piece and it's like a one-off and it was like made for Marilyn, and it's like kind of weird that there's this like connection with Kim and Marilyn and like the awkward like politics of the entire matter, which I don't really want to get into, like the Kardashians, all that stuff. But people have worn originals to the Met Gala before, and people wear original gowns all the time. I've seen there are people who wore Fortunis to the Met Gala. Fortuny, if you don't know, is an early 20th century designer. A lot of film and TV shows actually use originals as well for costumes. Lady Mary wore a Fortuny on Downton Abbey as well. But with those, there are multiple, we're just going to keep using the Fortuny example, there are multiple Fortuny dresses in collections throughout this nation that are being preserved for the long term. So how many of those preserved do you need necessarily? Is that different than Kim wearing the Marilyn dress? I would argue it is different because the Marilyn dress should, it's a historic moment. It's tied to a direct person in a moment in time instead of just generally being a designer. But I feel like this situation brings up so many questions surrounding conservation and how we view dress, and honestly the changing landscape of dress history and textile conservation. If this happened 10 years ago, I don't think there would be this much public outrage. I definitely think that my field would still have a lot to say about it, and we'd still be talking about it around the lunch table as much as we did today. But I don't necessarily think there'd be article after article after article online about it. And I think in a way that's really amazing for the field of textile conservation, to have this conversation and sort of open people's eyes to dress being an important part of our material culture and history, and it being something worth preserving and something worth getting mad about. Is it worth the risk to that dress? That's for, I think, an individual to decide. I don't really know how to end this, I'll be honest with you. I just have so many thoughts. I would love to know your thoughts about this situation. Should Kim have worn the dress? Do you think it was fine? Like, what do you think? I will leave links down below to different articles about this situation, and also about the wearing of historic dress and why the textile conservation community has really been pushing against that for a long period of time. I mean, it's such a passion of mine. I really want to be a part of this conversation, which is why I'm making this video. I'll be honest, this is not normally what I do on this channel either. I normally do sewing videos about what I've been making, and sometimes a video essay or two on like a fun historic dress topic that I'm really interested in. But I mean, I would love to talk more about textile conservation. I just haven't, because it's such a small field and we all have such varied and interesting opinions on things. And, you know, I'm still in school, I'm still learning, and I've been talking to literally everybody about this today, trying to get their opinion, and it's just so interesting to hear what everyone has to say. So I'd like you to view this more as a conversation than me just talking at you. If you want to see more from me, you can hit the subscribe button down below. I'm going to try to upload more. I'm heading into my 3rd year. I'm moving across the world and then across the country, and it's just like a whole thing right now. So don't expect any uploads in the very near future, but I hope to keep chatting with you. You can also find me over on TikTok at costumeandconservation, and also at Instagram at costumeandconservation. I hope you found this interesting, or, you know, head scratching, or a little bit, I don't know. I hope you found this fun. Anyway, yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.